So you made it this far on your cross country, but did you plan properly? This is where the lack of preparation shows. How thorough was your flight planning? How much detail did you look at? You have to look at a lot more detail than you think you do just to be sure that you're going to be safe, because there are a lot of things that can come unexpected that will cause you problems. And this is what we're going to talk about, common problem areas that people have when they're flight planning, or lack of preparation, I should say. I'm also going to talk about a real life experience I had going on a trip. I thought I was totally thorough in my preparation, but it turned out that there were some things that I didn't even consider and I didn't think were going to be an issue that could have been something more serious. So the first thing we're going to talk about is runway information. What you need to know about runway information, first of all, is you're going to need a runway length. First thing you're going to need. You're also going to need runway width, and you're going to need surface conditions at the runway. In this example, we're going to look at Galt Airport, and the runway length at Galt Airport is 2,802 feet. The width of the runway is 36 feet. So length you need to know, obviously, for takeoff performance, landing performance, and depending on your capability or your airplane's capability, is it long enough for you to be able to take off from that runway? So it's real important that you have to know that. The width is another thing that you have to take into consideration. How comfortable are you on a thin runway? This is a fairly thin runway. So surface condition is another thing. Is it a hard surface? Is it grass? What's your comfort level with that? So right now, it doesn't look too bad, 2,800 feet long, 36 feet wide, and it's a hard surface runway. But there's more things you have to look at here. If you look closely, it's 2,802 feet long, but it's got a displaced threshold of 415 feet. That means that only leaves you 2,387 feet if you're using runway 9. That's under 2,400 feet to land. You also have the width is 36 feet wide. So what does that mean to you? Is that a big deal? From my experience, most people, or most students I should say, and some pilots too, land off the center line when they're landing. You got to take that into consideration. If you have a crosswind, you got to think about crosswinds. How is it going to affect you? How good are you at landing in a crosswind? If you let that crosswind push you off the runway, off the center line, you're going to end up going off the runway if you have a thin runway. You also have to think about grass. Grass runways in general, supposedly you use less runway because it's got a lot of drag and it slows you down and things like that. But you're not supposed to get on the brakes in a grass runway. You're supposed to minimize that forward weight on the nose. In most runway situations where it's grass, they're shorter than a normal runway. They're pretty short. And if you don't put your feet on the brakes, the drag is not going to slow you down fast enough, and you're going to have to get on the brakes eventually. So if you only have a 2,400 foot runway here and you're trying not to put your foot on the brakes to minimize that forward pressure on the nose, you could run into an issue here. So I would definitely start applying some brakes right away if it was grass. The other thing we have to think about is traffic pattern information. So what do you need for the traffic pattern? You need to know traffic pattern altitude for one, and you have to know the direction of the pattern. Those are the two key points that you're going to have to understand. Something to keep in mind is that they're not always 1,000-foot traffic patterns, and they're not all left turns. So you have to look for those things. I've heard of 1 million people going into an airport that they didn't do their pre-flight planning, and they were calling left traffic in a right-hand traffic pattern airport. So this one right here, it's got a traffic pattern altitude of 1,675 feet. That's an 800-foot pattern. It's not your standard 1,000-foot pattern. You have to keep a lookout for that. The direction of the traffic pattern is left. Now, if it was a right-hand traffic pattern, it would show you, but if it doesn't show anything, it's going to be a left-hand traffic pattern. So in this airport, it doesn't show the altitude as a lower altitude or an 800-foot pattern, so it's a 1,000-foot pattern. and runway 5 and 11 are right-hand traffic pattern in this airport. You must look out for this. If you don't look out for this and you fly to an airport that is a right-hand traffic pattern and you're flying a left-hand traffic pattern, you're setting yourself up for a midair. You will be flying face-to-face with people on base landing at a runway if you're not paying attention to it. So obstructions and remarks are another area we have to cover. So this area is very important, and you really should look at the details of this because it can make a difference also of you being able to clear obstacles and things like that. So the first thing that we want to do is look for the obstacle information. And if you see over here, you have trees at the beginning of 17, and you want to be aware of where they are depending on which runway you're using. We also have brush for runway 35. Brush may not seem like a big deal to you, but it can damage the plane significantly. So you want to make sure that you're aware of where those obstacles are. We also have information in the remarks, and if you notice here, it says the runway is closed from December to March and when snow covered. So if there's snow, even if it's not December through March, if there's snow on the ground, the runway is closed. If you did not look at this information, you just went there, you would assume the runway's open. A lot of people don't check TFRs, they don't check NOTAMs. They look outside and they see the sky's blue and they think this is a perfect day to fly, and they just go. And then you get there and you find out stuff like this. And you wouldn't find out until you landed the airplane. So you have to know about this before you go. So another thing in the remarks section is the noise abatement procedures. In this example, you have to climb to 1,000 feet AGL before turning south. The reason they do that is for the towns or the cities. There's a lot of people complaining about airport traffic noise and things like that, so they want you to avoid those cities. That's another reason they make right-hand traffic patterns too, usually to avoid overflying a city. Other things you need to check are things that would get you stranded. You need to know about fuel and services, hours of operation, transportation, food and lodging. In this airport, we have looking for fuel and services. I don't see any. There's nothing about fuel. There's nothing about services here. So that could be an issue going into this airport. The hours of operation are unattended. Is there transportation? Not sure. Doesn't say anything about taxis, doesn't say anything about transportation, and doesn't say anything about food or lodging except that there's a campground adjacent to the airport. We need to know if there's fuel at an airport. We need to know if there's anybody there. If there's nobody there, if the hours are unattended and there's nobody there, how will you get in there when you land? How are you going to go to the bathroom? How are you going to call for a cab? You might not get phone signal in some airports that you go to, so you might not be able to rely on your phone 100% either. So is there a restaurant within walking distance, or are you close to a town? These are all things that you have to take into consideration when you're going into an airport. So I went to Air Park Dallas one time. It's probably, I think it was 2015. So I went to Airport Dallas, and looking at this, it's in the middle of a big city. It's located within a Class Delta airspace, but looking at it, it didn't really have any tick marks around the airport. So I would assume there's no fuel and services, but I looked at the airport information anyway. So looking at the airport information, it is open to the public. There is no control tower, but it is unattended. So I'm like, okay, it's unattended, but it's close to a city, right? And you also notice on the airport diagram here, it says right pattern for 3-4. That's another place it would show you for the traffic pattern. So anyway, I looked at the airport statistics on here. The aircraft that are based on the field are 63. There's 63 aircraft on there. And it also talks about general aviation is 67%. 33% is transient general aviation. So people passing through, landing there, taking off, parking there, whatever. There's 33% of their traffic is that. So this is for a 12-month period, and you can see, yeah, it was 2015 when I went. So I decided to look at more information. And the next part I saw airport services, it did have fuel available. So even though the tick marks weren't there, it does say there is fuel, but I have to call for fuel. I have to call before I get there to make sure I'm going to get fuel. So, okay, that's not the end of the world. If I need it, I can call and I can get the fuel. And if not, I can always fly into the Delta or fly to another airport on the way home. But there's also parking, there's tie downs available, major airframe and power plant services available here. Okay, that can't be that bad. It's a public airport. There's a lot of aircraft based there, and there's major services available along with fuel if I really need to do it. So I looked at the runway information. It's 3,000 feet long by 30 feet wide. 30 feet wide is not that wide, but I've landed on stuff like that before. I've landed on a 25-foot wide runway. And as long as you know what you're doing, you can stay in the center line, it's not a big deal. So I figured, okay, that's not too bad. Looking at the surface condition, it said asphalt in poor condition, pavement cracking, loose stones on runway. Okay, so I've been in this situation before near my home airport. They have a runway with cracks on it, grass growing through it, little stones on the runway, things like that. And it's really not that bad. It's a little bumpy on the landing, but nothing out of the ordinary, nothing extravagantly bad. So I figured, okay, with that, it can't be that bad. So I looked at the services available. Just at the bottom of this, it's got rental, it's got maintenance, it's got aircraft painting and interiors and aircraft cleaning, parts, everything. It's like, okay, it can't be that bad, right? Well, we decided to go. And my buddy's Saratoga we took, and he just got it painted, freshly painted. It looked beautiful. We did the calculations for the landing distance, everything like that. Everything looked good. We can make this happen, although it's a short runway. So we land there. We touched down, and then came the unexpected. On touchdown, the holes appeared. I'm not talking little holes. I'm talking big 6-inch holes that were probably about 4 inches deep on the runway, scattered through the runway. And I'm dodging these holes on rollout. And by the time the first hole popped into view, I was already below the speed that I can just abort. Kept my eyes on the runway, and I just weaving in and out of the holes. There weren't a whole lot of them, but there were enough holes. And then the big rocks appeared. According to the airport information, it said stones. These weren't stones. They were literally rocks. They were 4 or 5 inch rocks that were the size of a softball, some of them, and they were just scattered onto the runway. And we didn't hit anything at all. And before we left the airport, I walked the whole runway and I took all the rocks off, and I made sure I knew exactly where the holes were so I could prepare on rollout so I wasn't surprised. But man, it was nothing like what I expected, because all the information there made it sound like it was a busy airport. And it looked no different than the one, according to the information, than one that I have near my house that I go to regularly, and it's not that bad. So with a 3,000-foot runway, only 30 feet wide, there was very little wiggle room moving left or right to avoid the stones and the holes. So we successfully dodged it. We taxied out to the only place that led to a place to park. And this is what it looked like. So there's a long dirt area for a taxiway, and if you notice in the back over there, it's got a bunch of planes parked in the grass, and then behind that it's got a covered area where I guess tenants park underneath this covered area to protect them. So we start turning off the runway, and as we're turning off the runway to get on this taxiway, this is what our welcome was. So we pretty much just stopped. We turned and we stopped right there. We didn't go any further, and we shut down the plane right there. And we didn't know what else to do. We just left it right there because there's no way we're going to chance extreme tire damage. We didn't know exactly where it was referring to or anything like that. We went there to visit my brother. We went and had lunch with him. And this was in Texas, and we flew from Illinois. So we flew all the way from Illinois to Texas. We landed, we had lunch with my brother for about an hour and a half, and then we came back to the airport and we went home. So don't underestimate and always be conservative. If they say cracks and stones, assume big holes and rocks because unless you talk to somebody and you find out differently, those can hit you by surprise big time. So another thing that you want to take into consideration is your elevation of your airport. High elevation airports mean worse performance. So you need to know for sure what the elevation is because you're going to use more runway on takeoff. The leaning procedure for takeoff at a high elevation airport is different too. You have a 4,200 foot elevation or a 4,000 foot on elevation, you're going to need to lean for takeoff, and you're definitely going to use more runway and landing. You also have to take into consideration the temperatures. Temperatures make it worse too. So it's not just the elevation, it's the temperature. So make sure you do calculations for any high elevation airport. Make sure you know before you go that your plane can handle it in both the landing and the takeoff. So things to remember, just to remind you of the things that you're going to have to check. You're going to check everything on and above the airport. Above the airport refers to everything from the pattern down. So we're talking traffic pattern, we're talking obstacles and terrain. You should know where the traffic pattern is. Is it left or right traffic pattern? Is it an 800 foot pattern? Is it a 600 foot pattern? Or is it a 1,000 foot pattern? You want to know if there's trees off the approach end or off the departure end when you're taking off, so you know how to compensate for that. And if you have a displaced threshold, you need to know where that is, so how it's affecting your distance with the runway and everything. So terrain, obstacles, traffic pattern. On the airport, everything on the surface. So we did above the airport from the traffic pattern down. Now we're doing on the airport. So everything on the surface of the airport. So that's your runways, your taxiways, and your elevation. The runway condition, the taxiways, where are they? Do you have to back taxi? Or are there taxiways that go the whole length of the runway? Where's the parking? Where do you go when you get there? Are there tie downs? On the airport, things that can get you stranded. You have fuel, services, FBO access, food, transportation, lodging. It's always best if you could fly to an airport that's fairly busy, so you're sure that you're going to get a cab if you need one, or someone's going to be there if you need some kind of help. Is there services available for someone to help you change your tire? Is there fuel available? Did you land there with a bare minimum fuel and now you need to fill up before you go? If you don't check this stuff before you go, you can get stranded. Even if you're not planning on getting fuel, if you end up with a flat tire and there's nobody there that can change it, you're kind of stuck there. So you should really try to find an airport that has services available if you can do that. FBO access. So airports aren't always open. And if they're not open, you want to know about after hours access. Some are open 24 hours a day, some close, and they have key codes to get in for after hours access, or you have to call somebody. So you want to know how to get in the airport after hours, because you might need to go to the bathroom, you might need to have someone pick you up, you might need to have, if there's vending machines in there or there's weather services, you want to check the weather in there. So you might need to know how to do that. Also, after hours gate access. Some have gate codes that you get through the gate, and you want to make sure you check all that kind of stuff. Food and transportation. It's nice to know that there's food close by, so I would definitely try to see if there's a nearby restaurants. Transportation. Sometimes they have a courtesy car. Sometimes you have to get a cab or an Uber or something like that. And then lodging, of course, if you're ended up staying there overnight or something and you don't have anything planned, you can ask where the nearest hotels are and things like that. So this is all important stuff that you really should prepare for. So flight prep matters. 10 extra minutes of planning, it can significantly reduce your risk. So make sure you check all the things that we talked about before you go on a trip. I should have another video out within about a week about mistakes that happen on the arrival part of your flight, when things don't go quite as planned and you have to make last minute decisions. So thanks for watching. Fly safe.